Okay, so I wanted to move through these final lectures with you on some very fascinating subjects to talk about. This one is on ethology, which is animal behavior. Now, granted, they're focusing on the animalia, but be aware, because they're focusing on the animalia, they're talking about nervous tissue and musculature. That makes sense. It's one of the defining characteristics of the animalia. But don't forget that other organisms have behaviors too. Plants have behaviors, and fungi have behaviors, and protistans have behavior, and bacteria has behavior, and this kind of idea. Things respond to their environment. So while we're focusing on the animalia, just keep that in mind. And of course, natural selection would obviously impact all of these things. So again, just want you to keep it in mind. But obviously, research is where we base what we do. So Timbergen, he asked some very important questions. He asked the physiological, so the body's response to a stimulus. Why do we do that? Why do we jump when we're suddenly startled by something? One of my house cats is sitting right there. He looks really comfy. Cats, perfect response to this. Something happens that's unexpected, and they shoot out and run away, and then go like 5 or 6 feet and turn around like, what's going on, and see what it is, and then continue going if they have to. That kind of idea. It's a great response to an unexpected stimulus. And so also you can ask, how does your behavior change over life, which means experience? How does it affect you? I have friends that are in the military, and they've told me before, yeah, in a war zone, they note when people are sort of like new to the area, or if they've been there for a while. If you've been there for a while, you kind of realize what to respond to, what not to respond to. If you're new to the area, any unexpected sound, flop to the floor. That kind of idea, at least is what I've been told. I've never been in the military, but again, it's experience. Obviously teaches you a lot. If you've been on a roller coaster 90 times, you already know what's going to happen. So, the experience ameliorates what's happening to you. Certainly the bigger picture, how does it help you on the here and now and the bigger picture? And certainly the being biologically successful idea, how does it help you also? So that can easily connect to the evolutionary history. Has it always been the same? Has it changed over time? I showed you the Laetoli footprints, I think last chapter. Those are 3.5 million years old, but even though they're just footprints in like ash, mud, and ash, it's already showing you some behaviors that we still carry today in walking upright, having kids slightly behind the parents, that kind of idea. So things haven't changed in some regards, and then how have they changed over time? So Timbergen was asking these questions, and then you can frame them in a bigger picture, the proximate and the ultimate. So the proximate is the how, the physiological. Now, how do we respond to our stimuli? And the ultimate is the why, that's the evolutionary. So the natural selection, why it shaped us that way. So even humans have this, these fixed action potentials, these unlearned innate behaviors. It seems like it's stronger in some people than others. I'm not a psychologist, but some innate behaviors are just a little more ingrained. It seems like it's some people like anything unexpected, they jump or they scream, that kind of idea, just kind of how they are, where others are a bit more laid back perhaps. But still, we have these behaviors, even if it doesn't look like it affects somebody, maybe they feel it inside or their hair stands up a little bit, that kind of idea. And so once that stimulus starts, it's hard to beat it down, including a sign stimulus. You see something like a snake, you jump. You see a spider, you jump, you scream, or whatever it is. Even a fake snake or spider can really get you going, that kind of idea. So we're not that different humans, even though, again, this is talking about the animalia. And so Timbergen focused on this guy, the stickleback fish. They were noting this fish, if it sees anything that's kind of the right shape and has a red ventral tummy, it attacks it. It's perceived as being a potential competitor. So you can see the stickleback fish, as long as it has the right general shape and a red tummy, get it, because it might be one of those competitors for your territory or your food or your mates, that kind of idea. So I mentioned this before, migration, and I noted in evolutionary theory, really, there's two choices, adapt or go extinct. And I mentioned this way back at the beginning of the semester, that in a lot of ways, migration never comes up. And I think, if I remember correctly, this is the first time it's formally come up this entire semester, because a lot of things can't migrate. Even humans, I made a comment saying something like, yeah, if Tampa is just too hot for you, or you've had enough of hurricanes, fine, I'm moving to Seattle. Okay, now that's not really migration. We call it that. I'm migrating to Seattle. Because notice migration, the definition, regular long distance location change. But still, we can do it. Whereas I was saying, the Florida panther is kind of stuck. So some animals migrate regularly, some don't. Some humans migrate regularly. Even I did this when I was a kid. It's like my dad, once a year, every year we moved, and sometimes long distance. It's kind of my family did what they did, following jobs, that kind of idea. So it just happens, not only on our day-to-day clocks, but certainly in our circa annum clocks. There's there's just patterns that are there. Certainly circadian. I'm more of a morning person than I am a night person. Some people are night people than morning people. Bear in mind, as a species, we are a diurnal species, which means by definition, we're supposed to be awake during the day. There's some evidence that people who are awake at night, like maybe a night job, then that may not be the healthiest thing for you. You might have to do it, mind you, but it's not the healthiest. And so how species navigate, for us, when we moved around a lot, we use these things called maps. I don't know if you know what those are. Now we just tell our computer, hey, I want to go there, and it directs you. It's really quite amazing how the world has changed. But, obviously a bird can't do that. They might use actual positioning of the stars, or they might use magnetic fields. They have like biocrystals in the skull. These are ferromagnetic crystals that they use to navigate with. I wanted to note an issue on the North Star, Polaris. There's an interesting question that was brought up, and for some reason, oh, there it goes. I'm not able to access. Huh. Well, look at that. My computer is being really slow. Okay, that's very intriguing. 1 second while my computer decides to do whatever it's doing. I'm looking for this article that I wanted to show you. Perhaps that article has crashed. It's talking about, will Vega always be the North Star? And it won't be. So let me see if I can close that. It looks like that article is having a little bit of an issue. That's too bad. All right, so some of these things have decided to freeze. All right, 1 second. Technology, you gotta love it. Let's reopen the lecture. And we will continue on. So what that article was saying was that it won't always be the North Star. We have a procession that we go through with our North Star. And so as you go through this progression, Vega in the future might be the North Star, but not now. So we have to adjust. And that article actually notes that by the year 2100, Polaris will have moved far enough away that it's no longer our North Star. So species have to adapt to it. Even the magnetic field. The magnetic fields have been changing. About every 700,000 years, there's a pole reversal. North pole becomes South pole, that kind of idea. There was some interest and some discussion that perhaps species would go extinct in these pole reversals because they think north is that way, now north is this way, and that doesn't work out for them. I haven't seen enough evidence of that in the literature. So it seems like species are able to figure these out, these changes over time. It's intriguing too. We've been noting that the Earth's magnetic field is becoming weaker in the last couple thousand years. So geologically speaking, we're coming up on our next pole reversal. It won't be in our lifetime. That's why I noted geologically, but species again seem to be able to figure it out. So that brings up that idea of circa-annum rhythm, not just circadian. Circadian is day to day. Circa-annum is over the year. And we have that. My wife, was it today or yesterday? Recently, she made a comment saying, oh, man, I'm hungry all the time. I want to eat meat a lot. And so she was noting how it's been really cold out, Tampa cold, mind you, the last few days, and her body's feeling that, and she's feeling this drive to eat. That's not unusual. As you get towards fall and into winter, the lengthening of the days, classically through our histories, there's been a time of less food supply, therefore time to store, time to eat a bit more, that kind of idea. So even humans respond to this. We respond to daylight, to darkness. Interesting cycles out there, even lunar cycles, but be careful on lunar cycles. This whole idea that humans become more active on a full moon, and what I've read in the literature that doesn't correlate. Even my friends at work in like emergency centers say, yeah, that's not right. Humans are active all the time. Doesn't have anything to do with the moon. So kind of be careful there. But for some species, lunar cycles are obviously very important, up to and including one of my favorites, the Palolo worm. That worm only reproduces at very certain times during a certain kind of moon. So it's very intriguing. And there's also some evidence that the moon has an orbit that's getting progressively bigger around the Earth, and there's an idea that it might spin off one day. Should that happen, man, that's going to be very consequential, at least potentially consequential to this planet. Again, not in our lifetime, but it would be intriguing to see, at least in models, theoretically, how the Earth responds to this, and certainly how species would respond to it. Again, because it's not going to happen in our lifetime. So that all comes down to signals, behaviors. How do we respond to these things? What's happening around you, and do you have these innate responses? Even these like, wow, I didn't think I would respond that way, but I did. That kind of issue. And then how do we transmit that? There we go, transmission. Not just to ourselves, but to others. Be aware of this, be aware of that. You might like this, look out for that. This kind of idea. So communication's huge, and with humans, there's really two communications that we deal with. One is body language. vastly important. In fact, you have a piece of your body that's dedicated to nothing but language. Now, when I ask that in class, people say, oh, yeah, your mouth, your tongue, that kind of thing. No, 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 no. This piece of body that's dedicated, does nothing else but communication. And it's actually your eyebrows. You probably know that. If you've ever come across somebody that doesn't have eyebrows, it's a little bit off-putting a bit, because we express a lot through our face and through our brows, and we are not the only animal that has eyebrows for communication. You might want to think about that. So we have body language, obviously, not just, you can only see the upper part of my body because I'm making this video, but the whole body. In lecture, you see somebody that's like this, you might think, oh, they're closed off, but are they? Maybe they're leaning back on the podium, and maybe their legs are crossed. And now this goes from being closed off to being really relaxed. So again, seeing what the body is saying means a whole lot to humans. And of course, verbal communication obviously is rather important. Same with touch. Chemicals, obviously, we smell things. We don't smell quite as well as like my kitten. There's something called a homunculus, which is showing how much gray matter is dedicated to tasks. We use them in anatomy physiology. But our homunculus for things like chemicals, so smell and taste aren't as strong as maybe in a cat, but tactile is. Our hands, we touch things. Kids, perfect. They see something new, they want to touch it. Frankly speaking, adults aren't all that different. When they don't think people are looking, they might want to touch something they probably shouldn't touch. And even with kids, they touch it like a 2-year-old and it goes right in their mouth. That's the second thing that happens to them. Again, I've seen adults do things that probably shouldn't do. So again, this is how we do things. We don't really do this. Pheromones aren't really strong in humans. We don't really talk about pheromones with humans. We do with other animals, again, like house cats, and maybe they mark a territory or something with mating or something like that, but not so much with humans. For us, the closest thing might be like perfumes and colognes, but that's more of like not repelling somebody as opposed to necessarily attracting them. So a little bit different idea. So we have these behaviors that are fixed in us. Again, a human is a human. I've been saying that all semester. A human is a human is a human, that kind of idea. So don't take that too far, which is why we can see these sort of things. I'm not a psychologist. I find psychology and sociology and the humanities generally just fascinating. But from the papers I've read, this is very interesting, where you have, unfortunately, like sisters that are separated at birth, or brothers separated, whatever it is, and then they meet each other later on, and then you can study, just how similar they are. How much is it in the DNA versus how much is it in the environment? Where do the two meet? And so it's intriguing. I remember reading a study, it was sisters, and they were like 65 maybe when they first met each other. They didn't even know they had a twin. And then they came together, and it was really amazing to see the similarities and differences. There were a lot of similarities, their hairstyles, their clothes, even the men they married were like really similar to each other. Absolutely fascinating. And again, to see that boundary between DNA and your environment. So it's intriguing, including not just within species, but between species as well. So that's where learning comes in, how impacting is it? Obviously humans, we can be learning our entire life. In fact, we generally do. We live in a very complex world. The idea of PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, I've read that pre-20th century, if you're a PhD, you had a pretty good swing on the natural world, but not today. Now, when you have a doctorate, a field, your field like really well. Even biology, if you get a doctorate, your area biology really well, and the other areas, it's not really your area. So for me, like teaching Bio 2, that's much more up my alley than teaching Bio 1. Got no problem with teaching Bio 1, but I'm not a geneticist. My background is ecology, zoology, geology. That's Bio 2. So it's really changed over time, which means we can learn our entire life, not just formally, mind you, even informally. You want to go and learn something, learn a language. I've never learned how to play the pipes. I want to learn how to play the pipes, that kind of idea. So obviously behavior is being changed as you do that, and that's fine. So imprinting, this is intriguing. These innate things we learn at the beginning during, like when you're born, the sensitive period. Konrad Lorenz was famous. He's the one that had the baby geese, and so they hatch and they see him. Oh, you must be mom. So they follow him because he must be mom. So it was intriguing. But the question becomes, do humans do that? And now I'm not a psychologist anyway, so I went and looked, and yeah, humans do. So notice right there. Humans can exhibit all 3 types of imprinting: filial, sexual, and limbic. Filial imprinting helps infants to bond with their mothers. Sexual imprinting helps humans to find similar yet different enough mates to their parents. Limbic imprinting is when humans retain experiences of their birth in their memory and use those memories throughout their lives. Absolutely fascinating then that humans can do the same thing. I don't know what crash here. Sorry. That humans can do the same thing. So it's not just to the geese. Again, people don't think of humans, but we do. Even this one, I'm definitely up this alley. And the old stereotype that, men like north, south, east, west, and women like landmarks. And those are stereotypes. I definitely don't follow that. I don't like it when somebody says, go north on Dale Mabry. Okay, so the sun comes up this way, which means north is that. Okay, I'm going to go that way. I don't like that. If somebody says, head towards 275, gotcha. Or if you're on Dale Mabry campus, head towards Raymond James Stadium, gotcha. I like that. You can decide what's best for you. So it's not just humans again. Tinberg again was showing he had this wasp, found the nest, and he put these pine cones around it. And he left it there for like 2 weeks. And then he came back and he moved the pine cones, and the poor wasp couldn't find his nest. The wasp learned to associate pine cones equals nest. Yeah. How do we do that? Spatial learning. Somebody moves something in your world, and how do you react to that, even in your house? You have it, that's where I put it. Leave it there, that kind of idea. So again, humans aren't outside of this game at all. So we learn, associative learning. We connect X with Y, that sort of idea. Here they're noting a mouse and how it ate something that was distasteful. Birds are well known to do this. They eat a monarch butterfly and they get sick and they learn, yeah, don't do that again. But again, humans are the same, right? You went to that restaurant, you ate there, you got sick. I don't want to eat there again. That kind of idea. So again, these things happen. So we're really not that different, including this. This is Pavlov's dog. The ring the bell, he salivates. Something for me that would be an example here, coffee. The smell of coffee reminds me of some beneficial and good things from my childhood. Yet I cannot stand the taste of coffee. I'm a tea drinker. But the smell and memory intimately tied together. It doesn't make me salivate because again, I don't like the taste of coffee, but it does do other things. It's a conditioning. Same with operant. You do this, you get rewarded. You do that, you get punished. So it's trial and error learning. Again, predators learn to do things like I don't think your book has it, but there's a picture of it was like a coyote that had quills of a porcupine all over the poor guy's face. So you learn, yeah, don't do that again. The question with humans becomes, is this a good thing? You reward them when they do something right. You punish them when they do something wrong. So again, I'm not a psychologist, so I went and looked it up. And yeah, there's some questions about that. So, ask a psychologist, do your own readings, that kind of idea, decide what you feel is best for you. And yeah, my computer is having an issue. Look at that. Won't even open up the lecture again. I do not know what's going on. So I'll just finish up really quickly. I'm more or less through this anyhow. Let's see, where were we? So I'm sorry that my computer is having an issue. Okay, so that's trial and error learning. Cognition, again, just being aware of who you are and what you are and where you are. Same with judgment. Don't forget that judgment is just that. It's a learned issue. It varies from culture to culture. Be sensitive to that. Something that might be completely innocuous here in Florida may not be innocuous in another, even just part of the US, let alone in another country. So, be aware of that, understand right from wrong and how it changes, which is problem solving. We're dealing with this all the time. One of the benefits of staying in school and continuing to study is learning more and more complex situations and how to deal with those complex situations. It's okay to make mistakes, within reason, but you learn from your mistakes, right? And if you're not learning from your mistakes, and we have other questions to talk about. So they give you examples, chimps learning how to stack boxes, and here are ravens. Birds are fascinating. There was a group that learned for I think it was whelks, that kind of snail. How high up must I go to drop the snail that it cracks so I could eat it? If I go too high up, I'm wasting energy. If I don't go high enough up, I have to go up again and again and again. So they learn to maximize, go up this high, it works perfectly. They learned how to problem solve through. Problem solving can be an idea of intelligence. So like this one, learning from each other. Do chimps teach each other? Now this guy might have learned to take a stone and smash something, but is this guy actually teaching this little one, let alone another adult chimp? Or does this little guy, for example, see it and say, oh, I'll give it a shot and maybe teach himself? So there's some interesting research here, and I wanted to show you a video on that. Okay, so I got to change over to the video. Give me a second here. Okay, let me change over to my sound. Okay.
Do we have any mental skills which are uniquely our own? A key clue comes from a new experiment. Back at the University of Texas, Victoria Horner shows a chimp how to operate a puzzle box to get a treat. First, she taps. Then she slots. Next, she pokes. The chimp copies fairly well and gets the sweet.
This game we're going to play is about this special box I brought, all right? Here's a gummy bear. It's your turn.
Children copy the actions much as the chimps did.
There's a gummy bear. Good job.
Second box that I show the chimpanzees is this one, and it's identical to the opaque box, except that it's made out of material actually see-through.
Only now is it obvious that the tapping and poking don't achieve a thing. The box has a false seal. The chimps cut to the chase. They skip the needless steps. For the apes, it is all about the treat.
What this study shows is that apes don't just mindlessly ape. They also understand something more about cause and effect.
We found something quite surprising. Children were predisposed to copy, even when it meant that they were doing something that was really rather silly. So this seems a little like the chimps are outsmarting the kids in this particular study.
There he is. You got him out.
Why do children imitate slavishly?
The root of the children's behavior is the fact that they view me as a grown-up, possibly as a teacher.
That children expect to be taught is a vital difference. While apes can copy, most researchers believe that they do not teach each other.
Okay, so fascinating research. So culture then, as I mentioned, very important and very complex, not just other countries, but of course, even within country. I remember a case with my wife and I. We've been dating about a year or so, and I had done Tai Chi in Hawaii when I lived there, and then I did it here in Florida when I moved here, and she'd done it as well. So it was something we can also connect on. And I remember we went to USF. It was like Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. and there was a group there, and I was like the only Caucasian there, which is fine. I had no problem with it. But for some reason, she got put in the advanced group and I got put into the beginning group. Didn't care. But I remember as we were separating, I leaned over to give her a kiss goodbye, and wow, did her face turn like bright red, like, ah! And she pushed me away, and I suddenly realized my cultural faux pas. You know, it's in her culture, public displays of affection aren't encouraged. You don't do that in public. So even though I was at USF, I had forgotten the cultural issue, and then it was my mistake, and I did not mean in any way, shape, or form to embarrass her, but it was an issue. So you have to be cognizant of this. It's very complex how it influenced our behavior, and I've not made that mistake since then. So again, even though we're married, you know, people know that, you know, it's still, you just got to be sensitive, not just again when you go to other cultures and when other countries, and certainly when you do go to other countries. Remember, something here in the U.S. that might be completely innocent may not be there. So please be careful of that, and remember, you know, be polite when you go around, not only to increase your fitness. Maybe you need something, not just here in the U.S. when you go somewhere or somewhere else, but vice versa. So there's also an issue of not just reproductive issues, but food issues, if I get the word out, and it's dangerous. You know, if you're lucky, it's not. You go to a job, you're lucky enough to have a job, you make enough money, you go to Publix, even with the soaring food costs at supermarkets, not just Publix, mind you, but supermarkets, and you buy your food. What's dangerous about that? But for a lot of people, that's not the case. And so if they're trying to capture their food, animals can fight back. So that could be a problematic issue. Heaven forbid, you might live on the street or in your car and you don't have food. So maybe you have to go and look for food, try to find it somewhere, or rubbish in a kind of like go into a garbage bin or rubbish bin and look for it there. It's very dangerous. So that becomes this optimal foraging model, the cost versus reward that you're getting from things like food. And it's complex, to say the least. And this happens more than you might think. Excuse me. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the Heart Walk that was at Raymond James Stadium. So we were at the Del Mabry campus where we parked. We got there like at 6:30 in the morning. I'm like, wow, there's so many people here. But a lot of those people were not there for the Heart Walk. There was a food pantry that was there. So there were lines of cars for people getting food. There's a lot of need out there. So again, this happens more than you might think. And depending on the situation you're in, it can actually be quite dangerous. Not the food pantry, mind you, but like rummaging through a garbage bin or something looking for food. It could be very dangerous to do. Same with mate choice. That can be dangerous. How to select a mate. How to get to know somebody and ask somebody on a date, and certainly what happens in social situations, competition that might happen. Think back maybe like to your high school days, whatever it is, it can be difficult, which gets into these ideas. How do species go about their mating? Promiscuity versus monogamy. Let me show you the image because it does come down to morphology, at least on the biosense. Notice in this image, even as a biologist, I'm hard pressed to tell you which one is a male and female. They look identical. And we know when there's very little or less, at least, sexual dimorphism, difference between males and females, they tend to be monogamous species. And then when you get more and more sexual dimorphism, like here you could tell a male versus female, here you could tell there's difference in the species, in the gender. There tends to be more and more polygamy, but it could be polyandry or polygyny. So those are two words. Polygamy is the general idea. Polygyny is, as you can see, one male, lots of females. Polyandry, one female, lots of males. Birds typically come up here. So the question becomes, well, what about humans? We're not identical. My wife and I would be case in point. I'm 5'6" or so. She's 5'1". We're not grossly different in size in that regard, but I outweigh her by like 40 pounds, and I'm well within my BMI. So it's an issue where males for humans tend to be bigger. We tend to be fuzzier, that kind of idea, more heavily muscled. So we're not exactly identical. So are humans meant to be monogamous or maybe meant to be polygamous? There's some interesting research in there. We're just talking research here. I'll leave the morality to you. But there is an idea that about 5,000 years ago, there was kind of a switch from a lot of cultures that might have been polygamous towards more cultures that were monogamous. And it's been tied to an increase, an uptick in STIs, sexually transmitted infections, where cultures were realizing, oh yeah, if you do that, something might happen. And not all cultures did that. Some cultures for humans remained polygamous, but again, there is some connections there. Now, again, I'm talking just biology. I'm not talking ethics. I'll leave that to you. So dimorphism is a big deal. Obviously, natural selection affects this. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with competition within the gender, between genders, this kind of idea? They note here, again, competition within and between, like there's males that are competing here. They note that these are ritualized, but that's not always true. There are some cases where competition can actually be life or death. So you got to be careful. Again, think back to like your high school days and fights that outbroke, not just between males, but maybe between women as well. And how dangerous it can be sometimes. So we got to be really cognizant of these complex social interactions, including game theory. This is how you go after mates. They're noting lizards here. You can see the colors there, this orange-throated, blue-throated, and yellow-throated. These guys tend to be very aggressive. These are kind of intermediates, and these guys tend to be the sneaky ones. I like how they call that sneaky ones. And so they kind of like sneak in, mate real quick, and get the heck out of there, kind of idea. And in fact, it always reminds me when I get here that for the first time ever, we identified a case of cross-dressing outside of humans. It was in the cephalopods, particularly in the octopuses, where some of the smaller males weren't able to get females. So they were actually changing the texture of their skin, the color of their skin, and then how they swam to be more like a female octopus. And then the bigger bulls were like, oh yeah, come on in. And so the little male came in, he like quickly mated with whomever he could and then got the heck out of there before the big male could figure out what happened. So it's really complex behavior that we wouldn't attribute to a lot of species, but these things do happen. So that goes back to the question of how much is this is DNA, how much is it is the environment, and that's a little bit more complex. To talk about, what increases fitness and what doesn't increase fitness, it's a little bit difficult to find that fine line. Think back to that twin study, exactly how much was DNA, how much was it their environment. It's really hard to say, can a single locus have that much impact on behavior? And we're still looking into that, including this one, altruism. Does true selflessness exist? Including these guys, aren't they cute? Naked mole rats. But does it really exist? Or is it a case where behaviors are selfish? We don't realize that all behaviors are selfish. So don't take this too far. But even with like priests and nuns and monks, is there any benefit when they do what they do? Are they doing it solely for the benefit of others, just for what is viewed as the right thing to do in that culture? Well, if you're thinking of heaven, for example, well, there's a benefit. If you're thinking even something just biologically, like I feel really good when I do what I think is the right thing, that's a benefit to you. So does selflessness actually exist? Now, I'm not arguing against being altruistic. No, I'll leave all that to you. But we're just talking biology here, including things like relatives. I don't have any kids, but I've got nieces and nephews, and I love them to death. And within reason, I'll do what I can for them. They're my kin, which goes right into kin selection. So my culture, like in Scottish cultures, the clan system. Wow, that's tight. And yeah, clan is everything. That's kind of how it worked. And it's not as maybe tight now. We've grown, but still, it's a lot of pride in the clan system. So that's a kin selection. I'll do what I do because you're my kin. Even nephews and nieces and uncles and aunts, you don't have to be direct, fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters. There's a connection there, which is intriguing because I have a lot of family members that are police officers, and they note again and again and again how dangerous domestic disputes are. So does that buck against this? Well, maybe not. Maybe it just shows again how tight these things are and how inflamed emotions can get, including this one, which I know we've all heard of and seen before, this idea of I'll do this if you do that, and that kind of idea. It's been around forever. So still ask the question, does altruism actually exist? And I'll leave that to you, but it's an intriguing biological question. Which brings us to the last part. I know I mentioned it a few times, the connection of society with biology. Very tight with humans, with very complex social structures. Outside of humans, maybe the pan-troglodytes are pretty close. Elephants have very tight social groups. This kind of idea. Dolphins have very tight social groups. But humans, look at these social groups we create. And again, not even just within country, but between countries, how tight these things are and how important it is to be cognizant of these issues and how they connect to our evolutionary histories. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know.